Welcome to the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Joy Pullman. I'm the executive editor. With me today is the new executive director of the Claremont Institute's DC Center. His name is Arthur Milikh. Arthur, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I don't actually know, Arthur, if you have been on the podcast before. I do listen to our own podcast, but I don't, and I have been for many years. I don't know if I remember hearing your name.
Maybe once a very long time ago, 5 years ago.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is because when folks are new on the podcast, often Ben will like to ask them, because he's the usual host, likes to ask, can you just kind of tell us more about your career trajectory, who you are, where you've come from. Tell us a little bit of a bio, and it can be as personal or professional, as you want.
Sure. Well, I'm an immigrant to the United States. I'm from the former Soviet Union. I came here. Well, I was brought here as a 2-year-old, and we settled in Atlanta, Georgia. And let's skip 25 years, and then I was in graduate school and
Hmm.
studying political philosophy, and especially Machiavelli and Plato. And I thought to myself, well, I probably won't get an academic job because of the way I look. So I am interested in war, and I'll move to DC and try and make a career in foreign policy. And what I soon after that realized, after I moved, was that there is no such thing as statesmanship in Washington. What there is bureaucracies, mind-numbingly tedious bureaucracies that make decisions that govern our war strategy. And at the time, we were in both Iraq and in Afghanistan. And I became very quickly disillusioned with that and moved back into what I had been trained to do, which is American political thought. And I just recently started at the Claremont Institute, which is a California-based think tank that runs basically what I think are the best educational programs in the industry for young and mid-career people who want to understand America in a deep way, understand its trajectory and where it came from.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that you had come from did you say the former Soviet Union or one of the satellite states? I guess that's part of the former Soviet Union.
I'm from Moscow.
Oh my goodness. So, but you came at two. So, do you have a lot of, family history and connection and kind of that? Because I've been talking to, a number of our writers, they have family or they're immigrants from the former USSR. And so I've heard, from them, things that are kind of eerie. What we're looking at this summer, they will say, I mean, I literally have, I won't divulge information, about them because I don't want to get them in trouble, but some people that I know who are recent immigrants from China literally recently pulled me aside and said, they showed me pictures of the rioting in the streets and said, this is the Cultural Revolution. You know, those were their exact words. And, and so I'm just, and it was actually kind of taken aback to me because I think culture, I mean, I know that means millions of people murdered. This isn't like something academic. It's horrible if you use a term like that. It's like saying the Holocaust. So anyway, so all of that to say, do you have, kind of familial knowledge and kind of deep ingrained concern about what's going on now because of that? Or, so for example, my grandparents and my great grandparents are immigrants to the United States from Poland, but we've been here 4 generations, right? So I don't know a lot about Polish history, almost nothing. So I guess tell me more about like your personal connection and what you're seeing, and if it's kind of scaring you in a deeper level than someone like me who doesn't have that more recent connection.
Right. Well, look, I think that it's easy to go overboard and say that there's about to be, a cultural revolution in camps. I don't think it's that way because America, in certain regards, is extremely healthy. There is a large population in the United States that will not so easily be subordinated to a cultural revolution because these are people with direct, nearby experiences of political liberty. The
Mm.
still exists with them. They are armed. They still believe that they're free citizens. And so it's not so easy to just kind of shove these people into re education camps. So that's one thing. On the other hand, I do talk to a lot of Russian speakers, especially of my parents' generation who grew up in the Soviet Union. And it's an interesting thing because they feel all of those things that you just described. And in a certain way, it's worse here. And it's worse here for this reason that in the Soviet Union, starting at about the 70s, I think, very few people still believed in the promise of communism. And so when all
Mhm.
official propaganda was being issued out of their press organs, people thought to themselves, well, these are just lies. And
Sure.
I'm not going to rebel against them because that's foolhardy. Uh,
Mhm.
at least you have this internal skepticism of it that makes you freer in this odd way. And the situation is worse in America because we have this illusion of a free press, a press that
Uh-huh.
is really concerned about digging for the truth, a press that is always making arguments or seeming arguments so as to persuade your reason, when so much of it is just propaganda. And so,
Mhm.
kind of healthy skepticism. Maybe it's starting to exist more and more in America, but just a couple of years ago, it didn't exist. And so there was therefore a greater influence of the press when the public still believed to a great degree that it really was presenting an honest side of things.
That's fascinating. Okay. And that actually makes me kind of that makes me think about the topic that we're technically, here to talk about today. Because I also so we are actually talking about an article of yours in National Interest that was about. Actually, I should just check for the title. Well, actually, my favorite part, and it was a subtitle that said, "Our Do our universities undermine the common good?" I thought that was basically the crux of what your entire article was really examining, and you came to the conclusion, no, or sorry, yes, they do undermine the common good. But the title of it is Preventing Suicide by Higher Education. And I think there's clearly a nexus between kind of the thought world of higher education and the thought world of our media and our journalistic institutions, because of course the people who are running media organizations are products of the university system, and they're typically products of the more elite university system. So in other words, it's not you're going to get less leftist indoctrination at the extension for your state university out in your smaller town, rather than the flagship state university. Although, I mean, I know that it is there. I have lots of I live out in Heartland America, the kind among the kind of people who go to the state university extension, and the corruption, the political corruption is absolutely there, but it is so much more tighter. It's much the corruption is deeper at the higher that you go, among people who with higher test scores. And I'm putting that in quotes. I mean, actually, not because I disagree with the legitimacy of test scores, but because obviously raw intelligence does not make you wise. So we have a lot of really highly educated fools, or people who they take the narrative at face value, and they don't know any history. They've never heard. So I'm not a history major. I came out of a journalism school, but I went to Hillsdale College. So they have very deep history requirements, for example, for you to graduate even from something like the journalism program. So when you see kind of a propaganda line being run, you can say, "Oh my goodness, that sounds exactly like what the Soviets would say during the Cold War," or it sounds like the sort of thing you would hear from just different propaganda points in history. So it helps really ground you. And that's something that our elite institutions don't really offer anymore. And actual education, they're more about a dispositional, attitudinal education rather than a robust knowledge based education.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I would say, I've spent a lot of my time with this one thinker named Rene Descartes, and he has this really nice line where he says that um, uh, these scholars of scholasticism have been basically in tenured positions, and they have been arguing about the definitions of motion for 1,000 years and have made no progress. But what they're doing is constantly outwitting and outcompeting one another, and their lives are so devoted to that that they're removed from any kind of reality. And
Interesting.
and then he says, and the man who is compelled by necessity to be grounded in reality, like a farmer who wants to
Hmm.
be grounded in this necessity of the weather, has more common sense than these other people. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I grew up in Georgia, the U.S. state of Georgia.
Hmm.
Met a lot. I know a lot of uneducated, really brilliant people who I think are really, I mean, I know that this can sound like a bit of a conservative parody, but I really do think that they're the backbone of America. These are
I do
some of
too.
the people. there are some of the most sensible people. They are actually the ones that are least taken in by all of the propaganda in the press.
Yes.
They're the ones.
And they might use, language that is imprecise or not exactly, because what you were saying about not in touch with reality made me think of the coronavirus shutdowns, because obviously we're still living through that. So like I mentioned earlier, I live out in Heartland America, and so not in a city. Nobody around here that I know knows someone who has gotten this virus. And so, and I also have noticed a difference between the people who have stayed on lockdown out of touch with reality. They are more concerned because all they're able to do is access reality filtered to them through a media that is also untethered from reality. And I'm not saying that the virus isn't real. Of course, it is obviously real. What I'm saying is the reality of how it's affecting my state and my city is absolutely not the way that it's affecting heavily metro areas like New York City, Washington, D.C., any other area. The reality out here is the virus, is basically not a fact of life almost. The only way it's a fact of life is through the shutdown, not the actual virus. There's a couple of people circulating through the hospital, we have a handful of cases at a time, typically. But again, anyway, but I've noticed the difference between the people who are in touch with that reality, the people who have continued to go to the grocery store, who continue to go to church, who get out, socialize with friends in person. They are all aware of the fact that for us, it's like living in a hoax, because the reality that's being fed to us is not the one that matches our personal experience. But the people in the exact same town who are having the reality fed to them and filter them through the media that is very coastal city focused, they are the ones who perceive that there's a threat that doesn't exist and isn't attacking their in-person local friends. So, and I think that's just kind of like, one microcosm example of a wider societal phenomenon of, if you have your reality filtered to you through people who are out of touch with reality, then you're basically, it's kind of like we have people who have induced psychoses, honestly, and their psychoses are affecting our politics. It's kind of the people who like live on Twitter get to control the narrative when it doesn't match the reality of the country.
Well, it's interesting you say that. There's a there's a very nice observation in Tocqueville's Democracy in America, where he says that the bizarre thing with the freedom of the press is that it actually undermines freedom in a certain way. And the argument is this, that the press creates such a deformed, distorted cacophony in the public square, and it creates such an incredible skepticism in everybody's mind. You don't know who to trust. You don't know what
Uh-huh.
fact to rely on. You have a sense that everybody is lying to you.
Uh-huh.
It says that, but human life is such that you cannot live in that kind of confusion and skepticism,
Uh-huh.
perpetuity. So the mind settles into dogmatism, and you
Mm.
the authority that you trust, that you rely on, that thinks for you, that speaks for you, that feels for you, and then you go on with your life. And so that's one of these problems that the all of the founders and Tocqueville, all of them thought that the freedom of the press is a necessary evil,
Okay.
that needed for political liberty, but it has all this enormous host of side effects that actually tend to undermine political liberty and the freedom of the mind. And so, for that reason, all of them actually thought that libel laws were extremely important in terms of tapering down the power of the press to clamp down on individuals, to lie about them, to destroy
Mhm.
reputation,
Destroy their reputation.
and most importantly, by destroying someone's reputation, it teaches everybody else a lesson that you need
Yeah.
to shut up, because we rule you, we decide things for you, we inform you of what you ought to be informed about, and so your
Mhm.
should cease, and you should have a kind of posture of obedience towards us.
And so, how is that sort of posture of obedience also cultivated within the university? Because we have the same sort of, you parade of, the person who the mob is attacking on university campuses. That happens constantly.
Yeah, well, maybe it's worth thinking about this question by taking a step back and thinking about why we have universities at all. So,
That's
look,
a good question. One that almost nobody seems to ask
yeah,
nowadays, right? It's just like, oh well, We assume that it's good, therefore keep giving it money.
Right. Well, not all societies have had universities. In fact, many societies didn't want universities. And those are primarily traditional societies, or maybe one could even say theocracies. They didn't think that there should be mass enlightenment. They thought that there should be places in society where the smartest are given a lot of freedom to think and write. Maybe not publish, but to at least think and write. But ours is different. We have a direction. We have an aim in our society, and that is um, the development of science and commerce and political liberty. And so the goal of universities in America was to create human beings that are suitable towards those goals, suitable towards those ends. And so when universities were originally designed in America, there were three purposes. The first is civic education, which means that citizens would be taught to well, revere or respect their nation. They would be taught its history, its greatest.
Imagine that.
I mean, Hillsdale
What
is
a concept.
it's what universities used to be. And importantly, in this kind of civic education angle, it would teach you certain habits of character that were necessary for democratic citizenship. So, for example, the capacity to reason and therefore be persuaded by reason and being taught to persuade others through reason. Because the opposite of that is force. So,
Hmm.
kind of, the goal is to open up the soul so that it is capable of doing these kinds of things, and that requires itself an education. The second goal was science, scientific research, and you may think that that's far removed from education, but the nation actually depends on science, and the reason for that is that science is both defensive and offensive. It's defensive insofar as the spreading of science throughout the world is a way to disrupt some of our would-be adversaries. Uh,
Hmm.
their kind of traditional theological fanaticisms. And it's defensive in another sense because it creates the science, the industry, the research that is the basis of our wealth, our comforts, and what we end up sending abroad. And the reason that this is important is because, especially Hamilton understood that we are not capable, like other peoples, of empire and long-term war. It's not in us. And you see in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's like, the
We stink at it.
yeah, the Romans would not have had any of these problems. These wars would have been solved,
Well,
in
partly because they're a lot more brutal than we're willing to be.
that's right. And so we get involved in conflicts.
Right.
Uh,
We build them schools, yeah, we build hospitals, we feed people instead of just basically droning them and saying, shape up. That's what a Roman would do with a drone, right? Bomb
right,
the bits out of, just incinerate some town and say, hey, which one's next if you guys don't cut it
that's right.
out. Yeah.
And so science in this regard is a necessary component to our strength abroad. It's our comparative advantage. We can't build empires, but we can create incredible wealth and buy military equipment through it. So
Hmm.
that's that's the second reason. And then there's one final reason. It should be the education. It should be a place where the smartest go to become wise. And by smartest, I don't mean what we discussed earlier. Just a cognitive test. This stuff ends up being often silliness. It's a place that will allow genuine liberal education by putting before the mind some of the wisest books and forcing you with a guide, i.e., a wise teacher,
Hmm.
think through some of these arguments so that we can have, the highest human good, which is self-knowledge. So that's what a university should be about. Uh,
It sounds great, but it's not. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to you think about this, and you talk about. I love that. I mean, you talk about this in your article as well, and I love that you really say, let's get what's the whole point? Why do we even have these universities? Because that I think is the crucial question for
yeah,
then determining how to
right.
treat them, how to fix them, where are we going? It's just yeah. So and then but the only one of these three that I think that our universities, and you say this in the article also, do decently is the scientific aspect. The other two are completely, not only are they obliterated, they're actually kind of they do the opposite of those two
Yeah.
aims. They make Americans worse citizens,
Yeah.
and they make them they make them fools, not wise. And one of the things that I also found really interesting about it is that you made an argument for something that almost nobody on the right is willing to make, which is, look, there have to be consequences for these massive failures, and that you talk about in different ways, but basically one of them is just pulling their funding in various ways.
Yeah. Look, these institutions receive federal funds. They receive
Hmm.
federal funds through federal research grants. They receive student loans, which are backed by the taxpayer, and the taxpayer, in return, should get something. He should be paid.
Again, imagine that.
Yeah, he should be
I wish I would ever hear a Republican congressman say that. And never do.
right. And the reason that, and the consequence of them not saying this is America today.
Right.
Uh, the point is that if these institutions are to receive these benefits, including tax exemption from any income,
Hmm.
they should be contributing to the nation, and they're
Right.
doing the exact opposite. They're undermining the nation.
Yes.
Are teaching generations of young people to despise the nation. They're the cause of the spreading of all of the propaganda in the press
Yes.
on identity politics and a variety of other things. And so the question is, well, why is it that the taxpayers and the American and our political leadership tolerates these kinds of things? They should.
Yes.
No sane nation, no sane nation would tolerate having such corrupt, hostile institutions to receiving these public benefits. America has the freedom of speech, and so these radicals are free to say as they please, of course. But
But they're not free to have me pay them to say things that destroy my country.
that's it.
They can say it on the street corner all they want, but I don't want my money to be funding the amplification of their insanity.
That's right. And giving them public respectability. And
Hmm.
look, Harvard, the
Right.
essay scores are this high. That means everybody's smart. And
Right.
if everybody's smart there and they're repeating the identity politics dogma, that must mean it's true. So look, the what is currently bubbling up, which is a lot of young people, especially, but not just young, that are absolutely sick of the defeatism of the establishment right in saying that it's okay that these universities exist. Let's just try to do some very small ball reforms
Hmm.
on tenure lines so that one conservative professor can
Right.
swim in the sea of the left. Let's
Good
do
luck, buddy. Hope they don't show up at your house with bullhorns. You
that's
know.
right. That's right. Let's get Ben Shapiro to come to campus and
Right.
do a YouTube clip off of it. These are all losing strategies. And the proof that they're losing strategies is that the right has been doing this for the past 60 years,
Yeah.
and cases are only getting worse and worse.
Right.
So I think that this is a civilizational level problem. And the
Hmm.
only way to genuinely solve it is to pull their federal funding. And the way to do that is one, student loans must be privatized. Two, they should no longer have tax exempt status. And three, where universities that are self-consciously poisoning the public good while hiding behind the sciences for public respectability, that money should be taken from them. And it should be given to a federal research lab or a variety of things that we can think through. But the idea that, today, something like 40% of college age people attend college. The
Yeah.
dropout is abysmal. In
Yes.
1970,
It's 50%. Half the people who go drop out.
in 1970, the attendance rate for college age people was 20%. In
Hmm.
1990, it was like 10%. I see no reason why 40% of young people should be going to these institutions. And I think it would be a net benefit if over the next 15, 20 years, an overwhelming majority of these places was forced into bankruptcy. And from the
Now
ashes,
you're getting real.
yeah, from the ashes, you can collect the worthwhile faculty, and
Hmm.
private funders can put together a handful of genuinely good institutions.
Now, here's one of the things I wanted to ask you about that. So, of course, you wrote this article several months ago, and now, as we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we're in the middle of I call it not a pandemic, but a shutdowns. Because the real effects have, for the most of the country, been the shutdown rather than the virus. And so, obviously, the shutdown and the panic have had a huge effect on colleges, and we're just beginning to see the tip of the change there. But I mean, it seems like regardless of whether the shutdown should have happened or they should have the effects, they are happening. And colleges were on very precarious financial footing, and a number of them are going to, as a result of these shutdowns, they're going to go under. So it won't be, that the Congress stepped up and did its job and defunded these radicals, but the fact that Congress and governors, shut down the economy will have the unintended but salutary effect of killing off a bunch of garbage colleges. Do you think that will help? Will that have an unintended effect of kind of accomplishing what should have been done on purpose that you're talking about here? I mean, obviously, I don't want to make light of the fact that that will require a huge economic restructuring for many people's lives, many communities that are university towns. Many people who aren't, who aren't radical, crazy campus faculty will lose their jobs, who didn't deserve to. So can you kind of talk through the fact that, I mean, universities, there, we've been talking about a higher ed bubble for decades. The government's been inflating higher education artificially for a very long time, and just fiscally, as well as ideologically, colleges were running on fumes. And so now that it seems like the shutdowns are going to prick that bubble, do you see, I guess, what would be a wise use of the situation to accomplish the other more important, I think, good of de-radicalizing the universities and making the public funds put into them actually work for the common good?
Well, it's a I'm
I
sure
know
I
that's a big question, and I'm not asking you to
there's a
be.
lot there, and I'm not sure I can answer all of it. But I will add one thing that you're right that some colleges will indeed close down, and that's not good enough. That should be accelerated. But in addition, it doesn't fully accomplish the mission if, let's say there are 3,500 colleges and universities in America, and let's say over the next year, 200 of them close down. That's not enough, not
Mhm.
just in terms of number, but most importantly, it's not enough because they have to be publicly humiliated so that it is understood broadly that what they have been peddling for the past many years is unacceptable. It
So
is
they can't pin their demise on coronavirus and kind of blame shift, but it has to be very clearly publicly
yeah,
said you are losing funding because you have on staff professors who encourage people to riot.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. And
yeah.
it's not just rioting, it's the doctrines. Let me give you just an example of these doctrines so that it's more clearly understood.
Hmm.
You know, identity politics is a misnomer. It's not politics of identity as it sounds like it, and neither is it tribalism or everybody gets their own tribe. It's none of those things. What it is a claim about marginalization slash victimization and oppression. And so the oppressor group, which they are not shy about defining, what
Hmm.
the American context, it means white people, but especially white males,
Hmm.
that their identity, how they think of themselves, is fundamentally oppressive. And
Hmm.
it and so
Their
long
being is oppressive. They were born evil,
that's yeah,
basically, and they can't
well,
get rid of their evil no matter what they do.
that's right.
Yeah.
Whereas all of the marginalized groups are superior to the oppressor in two very important regards. The first is that they are morally superior. They're morally superior because, as Kendi says in his latest book, um, the experience of marginalization allows you to understand justice in a way that the oppressor cannot. And
Hmm.
therefore, as I understand justice, um, I can judge myself, and I can also judge you, you who are the oppressor, who are an oppressor partly because your reason is distorted by your power, by the superstructures that you or your ancestors have built for you. And so, in the moral sense, I'm your superior. In the second sense, and a just as powerful sense, as a victim group, I am your intellectual superior. And that's because, you see, what's the easiest way of putting it? Your reason is distorted in a way that you cannot walk out of. And you cannot understand my experiences as an oppressed, marginalized group member. On the other hand, I can understand everything about you. I can understand your white ability. I can understand your white superstructures. And therefore, given these two arguments, the moral superiority and the intellectual superiority, what it means is you oppressors, you need to shut up, you need to sit down, and you need to be ruled by your betters.
Your betters who are better by being inferior, by being damaged, harmed, hurt, and kind of crippled.
And yet we are also pure and innocent, whereas you are tainted by sin and intellectually inferior. And that is one of the main doctrines that the universities are exporting today to several generations of young people. And those doctrines are precisely the opposite of what America stands for. America stands for equality under the law and the equality of rights. Mm-hmm. And what these doctrines say is the opposite. No, equality under the law is just a white racist superstructure. We, the marginalized, right, more rights. The law should not take account for our misdeeds because you have compelled us into these misdeeds.
Yes, yes. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking you are, literally summarizing something I just read yesterday from a guy who wrote a book called In Defense of Looting, who literally said that theft, is okay because slavery happened. It's okay for people to loot right now because, the United States had legalized slavery 150 years ago. Right. And he was using exactly the same arguments that you're saying, to say, okay, he literally said, the law is white supremacy. Right. So it's crazy town.
It is.
And it's not only crazy town, but again, like I am being forced to pay people to teach others to go and steal, from me, run in and grab a TV for Pete's sake.
Right. And look, this is a civilizational level conflict.
Yeah.
These two Americas, the America of identity politics and the America of the Constitution, they cannot coexist. They cannot coexist. One side must prevail over the other. Right. And it's a shame that much of the intellectual class on the right has basically slept through this, has been advocating for small ball policy changes, while the left has been accumulating incredibly powerful assets over the last 30 years. They have accumulated almost totally the press with some outliers, the universities, big tech,
the K-12 system, which is huge. It's the largest employer in the country.
That's right. All of that now belongs, for the most part, to the left. Mm-hmm. And what now we have as conservatives is kind of a question mark. What exactly is the asset that is ours? And I suppose it's the American public, but the American can be cracked down upon. Uh-huh. I mean, if the freedom of speech is lost in America, which is absolutely possible, in fact, we're sort of halfway there. Yeah, as we began. But if big tech really starts removing the Federalist, the Claremont Institute, other people from
and deciding what you can find in your search results, what comes up in your Facebook feeds, that you never know about things that are happening, they are basically controlling your mail.
That's it. And it may get worse. I mean, they possess all of your thoughts. They possess all of your histories. They can.
Well, they know. They literally do. Like Facebook, for example, knows what makes people outraged. It knows what makes you outraged. It knows what you've clicked like on, clicked sad faces on, and therefore, they've done studies that show you could manipulate people's feelings by having different things show up in their Facebook feed.
That's right. So look, there is already a kind of tacit pact between the Democratic Party and the mainstream press. Well, what if that also takes place with big tech, where it's a clear path? And they possess so much information on us, can hand over surreptitiously so much information in a time of craziness and weakness. And these are all real possibilities. Conservatives always talk about how, America will go on forever. Well, no country goes on forever.
We would lose. Yeah.
It always has some kind of concrete end. And while we see all of these possibilities, there are many people who just say, well, you don't like this, then build your own internet, as if that's a serious argument. So these are
You
the
have to be able to have people know that it exists, which they can't if it's suppressed on the other internet. What are you going to do? Hire millions of people to go door to door signing people up for your new internet? It's not going to happen.
right, right.
Well, so as we close out, I think I have one last question for you too, though. So we've got to this point where I'm sitting thinking, oh, I mean, I already know, but things are bad. We're in trouble. But but people need to be taking very prudent actions quickly. So as we close out, what do you think are prudent actions quickly that individuals and lawmakers need to be taking immediately, ASAP, to address kind of these big problems we're talking
Right. Well, the first thing is to start talking about them and start calling people out. The right is constantly fearful of the left in a way that the left is not fearful of the right.
That's
So,
true.
so the first thing is to step out of that and to understand the stakes of what we're fighting for. We are fighting for this civilization, for this country. If the left wins, and it's not impossible, think about what you've seen over the past couple of months with these riots. The riots, the looting, the burning, the targeting individuals. In a
That's
future,
what they're willing to do.
America, mobs will be unleashed onto certain people's houses, onto
They
their families.
are already unleashed onto certain people's houses.
It's a little random right now, but
Okay,
it will be more targeted. So
sure.
that future is not impossible. And so
Right.
the things that can be done is, look, conservatives need to do a net assessment in their own minds. What are our assets and what are the left's assets? And then you figure out what you can do to weaken the left's assets. Because unless there's some kind of parity, things can get very dark in America. And
Hmm.
the obvious assets that are weak are the universities, which can be undermined, as I said, through tax exempt status revocation, through privatizing student loans, by taking away federal research funding.
As well as alternative certification. So I think a bit, because I keep thinking people know that the education system is corrupt. They know, especially that higher ed is corrupt, and they have a whiff of the fact that it's in K-12. And then I always think, why do they still keep sending their kids there? Because they want their kids to. It's a gate. It's a gatekeeper. That higher education is a gatekeeper to the good life. So if there are alternative routes for the good life, if you're opening those up to people, then you're allowing them to bypass indoctrination centers.
That's right. That's right. Alternatives must be created.
Hmm.
Apprenticeship programs must be created.
Yes, yes.
That is absolutely true. And these things do need to take place at the same time. But for now, it is possible to do harm to the left's assets because they are undermining the nation, with the press as well. There is no sane person ever thought that the press would have the kind of power to destroy people's lives and reputations as it has now, to label people a racist, and then their entire career is over. These are things that the American public already finds intolerable, and there have to be laws that are
I think
resurrected.
there should also be better harassment laws. So if I mean, so for it should be illegal to be on a public sidewalk holding a bullhorn at 1 in the morning. I mean, it is because of noise ordinances, but like things like that, it should not be okay to be standing outside their house harassing them, but the police don't step in because it's on a public sidewalk. Things like that. Doxing. All there are other kinds of laws for these kind of targeted. I mean, people should. There should be maybe worse penalties for running into a restaurant and shouting in people's faces, and demanding that they do things. And those are all laws that can be tightened up and improved as well.
That's right. That's exactly right. And conservatives must look at themselves as counter-revolutionaries. You no longer live in the country that you grew up in. This country belongs to the left. But there are a lot of us. They are very angry and they're intelligent. And they must look at themselves as fighting back for space that has been lost, has been ceded. And they should not do so through the the predictable channels. Okay, we're going to depend on the courts again to
Right.
litigate. That era has been lost. Not
Yeah.
completely. There is still some hope, but
But
conservatives
it's
need.
more of a crapshoot.
That's right. Conservatives need to be thinking through these kinds of alternative scenarios and ways that some of this space can be ceded back to our side.
Well, that's a great place to end there. And I want to thank you, Arthur, for joining us. Folks, this is the Federalist Radio Hour. We've been talking with, I'm Joy Pullman, the executive editor there. I've been talking with Arthur Milikh. He is the new executive director of the Claremont Institute's center in Washington, D.C. Arthur, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.